The shift started at 6 in the morning, same as always, and Grace Navarro tied her scrubs at the waist and checked her badge in the locker room mirror for exactly the amount of time it took to confirm it was clipped right. She was not a woman who stood in mirrors. She had too much to do and not enough hours to do it in, and that had been true for long enough that she had stopped noticing it as a problem and started treating it as simply the shape of her days. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. She was 34 years old. She had been a nurse at Meridian Medical Center in Callaway, North Carolina for 6 years, 3 of them on the oncology floor, which was the floor nobody fought to get assigned to and which Grace had requested twice. People asked her why sometimes, colleagues mostly, the ones who had transferred off oncology after a year or two with the specific relief of people who had decided something was not for them. She told them the patients needed more. That was the true answer, but not the complete one. The complete answer was that Grace had watched her grandmother die in a hospital where nobody had time to sit with her, and she had decided at 17, standing in a corridor outside a room that smelled of antiseptic and something lonelier than that if she ever had the capacity to change what that felt like for someone, she was going to change it. She had the capacity now. She used it every day. She had grown up in Asheville, the second of 3 children, raised by a woman named Rita Navarro who worked the front desk at a physical therapy clinic for 21 years and who had the particular quality of people who were genuinely tired and genuinely warm at the same time, who never let the tired win. Grace's father had left when she was 9, not dramatically, not with a scene, just a gradual withdrawal, and then one morning a half-empty closet and a note that said things she no longer remembered word for word and did not need to. Her mother had looked at that note, folded it in half, put it in the kitchen drawer, made breakfast, and never discussed it with any of her 3 children in a way that was not a refusal to engage but simply the decision of a woman who understood that some things were best buried quickly so you could keep moving. Grace had learned to keep moving from watching her mother do it. She had gotten into nursing school at UNC Asheville on a partial scholarship that covered 60% and a loan that covered the rest, and that she was still paying back at $340 a month. A number she had made peace with the way you made peace with a recurring bill that was never going to be optional. She had graduated in the top third of her class, had been offered positions at 2 hospitals, and had chosen Meridian in Callaway because it was 2 hours from her mother and had an oncology floor with a reputation for taking its patients seriously. She lived now in a 2-bedroom apartment on Marsh Street, the second bedroom technically unused except as a place where boxes she had not unpacked lived alongside a folding table with a sewing machine she had bought with good intentions 3 years ago and used twice. The apartment cost $975 a month, which was more than she had initially intended to pay and less than she could get comparable space for elsewhere in Callaway, which was the math of a mid-sized city that had discovered it was desirable faster than its housing stock could adjust. She had been in the apartment 4 years and had hung 12 things on the walls and bought exactly the furniture she needed and no more. Not because she was Spartan by nature, but because she was waiting for a feeling of permanence that kept not quite arriving. The hospital was a 12-story building on the eastern edge of Callaway, which was the kind of Carolina city that had a good college and a struggling downtown and a river walk that the Chamber of Commerce photographed extensively. Meridian was the largest employer in the county. It had been purchased 3 years ago by a company called Halcyon Health Group out of Atlanta, the kind of acquisition that produced a great many announcements about improved standards and expanded services, and which had so far produced, in Grace's direct experience, a reduction in staffing ratios and a new policy manual with 47 more pages than the previous one. She was not bitter about this. She was practical about it. The difference being that bitterness required energy she did not have and practical meant you worked with what you actually had rather than what you wished you had been given. She drove to work in a 2017 Honda Civic with 94,000 miles on it that she had bought used and maintained with the same careful attention she brought to everything she could control. The drive took 19 minutes at 5:45 in the morning when the roads were quiet and the October dark was still sitting on the city. She parked in the staff lot, walked through the side entrance, stopped at the locker room, and began. What she had on the morning that changed everything was a regular Tuesday in October, a floor census of 14 patients, a charge nurse named Darlene Sykes who ran the oncology unit with the firm efficiency of a woman who believed that systems existed for good reasons and that people who questioned systems generally caused more problems than they solved, and a patient in room 411 named Walter Odom. Walter Odom was 79 years old. He had been on the oncology floor for 11 days, admitted after what his chart described as a rapid deterioration in a pancreatic cancer diagnosis that had been delivered 6 months prior. His family was listed in the intake forms. A son in Charlotte, a daughter in Phoenix. Neither had visited. Grace knew this not from the chart but from the simple evidence of his room, which had no cards on the windowsill, no flowers, no jacket hung over the visitor's chair, no human evidence at all of anyone having been and gone. The chair had been in exactly the same position for 11 days. She knew because she had noticed on the first day and kept noticing, and the noticing had settled into her the way quiet wrongnesses do, without noise, without resolution, just present. Walter had what the floor staff called good days and other days. On good days he was alert and had opinions about the morning news and occasionally made jokes that were actually funny in the specific way of a person who had been genuinely funny for a long time and had kept the habit past the point when most people would have lost it. On other days the pain came through the medication in ways that the medication was no longer fully equal to, and he turned inward and became unreachable in the way that bodies have of retreating before they are entirely done. The doctors used the word palliative now with a consistency that meant something specific. Grace understood what it meant. She was not sure Walter's family did, or whether they knew at all that the word had changed. She had been assigned to Walter from his 3rd day on the floor. This was not an accident. Darlene assigned the patients who were going to be hard to the nurses she believed could carry them, which was its own kind of compliment wrapped inside an expectation. Grace had developed a habit with Walter that had started simply and become something else without either of them entirely intending it. In the mornings when she came to check his vitals and adjust his medication schedule, she would stay 5 minutes longer than the task required. Not to do anything specific, just to be present. She had found over 3 years on this floor that presence was a thing some patients needed as much as they needed the medication, maybe more, and that it cost nothing except the 5 minutes, which she found and kept finding even on the days that were hardest to find them. Walter talked on his good days. He talked about the town in eastern Tennessee where he had grown up, about a hardware store his father had owned where he had swept floors after school for 10 years and learned the name of every tool in the building before he learned long division. He talked about a woman named Iris with a quiet precision that told Grace everything she needed to know about who Iris had been to him and how long ago she had been gone. He talked about his son Robert in Charlotte and his daughter Patricia in Phoenix with a carefulness that Grace recognized as the speech of a parent who had noticed something disappointing about their children and had decided to love them past it without making it a declaration. He did not say they had not come. He did not say he was waiting. He mentioned them the way you mention people who are present in your life simply by virtue of being in it, which was a mercy he extended to himself daily that Grace found quietly extraordinary. On the morning that changed everything, Walter was not having a good day. She knew before she entered the room. She had learned to read the quality of a patient's stillness from the doorway, the difference between the stillness of sleep and the stillness of pain, and when she pushed open the door to room 411 at 7:15, Walter was lying on his side facing the window with his eyes open and the particular fixed quality of someone whose body was doing something that required all of their attention just to endure. She did not say good morning in the bright, automatic way that some nurses said it because they had learned early that cheerfulness was efficient. She said, "Walter." Just his name, quietly, in the same tone she would have used if she were setting something fragile down carefully. He moved his eyes to her. He did not speak. She checked the pump. She adjusted the line. She took his temperature, his pressure, the small specific choreography of tasks that she had done enough times to do without thinking and that she did anyway with full attention, because the day you stopped paying attention was the day you became someone other than the nurse you had meant to be. She made a note in the chart. She was about to go when he spoke. The voice was thin. Not weak exactly, just reduced, the way a river goes in dry months, to something that is still entirely itself but quieter. "I can smell the breakfast cart," he said. She looked at him. The breakfast cart came through the floor at 7:30. It was October and someone down the hall had ordered scrambled eggs, and the smell had drifted this far. She had not consciously registered it. He had apparently been lying there for a while, smelling it, turning something over. "I haven't been able to eat since Friday," he said. "The medication schedule." He paused. "But I can smell it," she said. "What would you want if you could have anything?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the October sky was pale and cloudless over the parking structure and the street below. "Toast," he said. With real butter. My wife made toast every morning without fail, even in the summers when it was too hot to want it. 42 years. He stopped. He did not need to say the rest. The nurses here are kind, he said instead, and she heard the effort in the word kind, the thing he was choosing to say so he would not say the other thing. But nobody makes toast. She went back to the nursing station. She pulled up his dietary orders on the terminal. The notation was clear. NPO nothing by mouth pending a swallowing evaluation that had been scheduled and rescheduled twice because the speech therapy department was running behind. The NPO notation was standard. It was also, she knew from looking at Walter's full chart and from 3 years of reading palliative charts carefully, a notation that in his specific situation carried a particular cruelty wrapped inside a protocol. The swallowing evaluation was not going to change anything material about Walter Odom's treatment. It was paperwork chasing a moment that had already passed. And in the meantime, a 79-year-old man was lying in bed smelling the breakfast cart and thinking about his wife. She thought about it for a full minute. She was not a person who acted without thinking. She had learned early that the gap between a decision and an action was where your actual values lived, and she tried to live in that gap honestly. She thought about the protocol. She thought about why the protocol existed, which was to protect patients from aspiration risk, which was real and serious. She thought about what aspiration risk meant in the context of Walter Odom's current prognosis. She thought about what nothing by mouth cost him this morning against what it could realistically protect him from. She ran the calculation not as a rule follower and not as a rebel, but as a nurse who understood both the rule and the person it had been written to protect and what the relationship between those two things looked like right now. She went to the small family kitchenette at the end of the hall. There was a toaster there and a drawer with packets of butter that families used when they were staying over. She made 2 pieces of toast. She put them on a clean napkin with 2 butter packets beside them, and she carried them to room 411, and she closed the door behind her, and she pulled the visitor's chair to Walter's bedside, and she helped him sit up and she said, "Here." He looked at the toast. He looked at her face. His eyes were very clear in that moment, clearer than they had been all morning. "You're going to get in trouble for this," he said. He said it without alarm, just as a fact he needed to name before he accepted what she had done. She said, "Eat the toast, Walter." He ate it slowly. She sat beside him in the chair that had not been sat in for 11 days, and she did not speak much. He buttered the toast himself with hands that trembled slightly but managed it, and he ate both pieces and drank some water she poured for him and looked out the window at the October sky and said, "That was right," with the specific contentment of a person who has received exactly the thing they needed, which is different from the contentment of receiving something they wanted. She cleared away the napkin and the butter packets. She adjusted his pillow. She checked his comfort level and made the necessary notes and left the room. She was back at the nursing station by 7:52. She did not know that the door to room 411 was directly across the hall from room 412. She did not know, because it was not in her patient assignment and was not her information to have, that the man in room 412 had been admitted 2 days prior following a cardiac episode at a downtown hotel, that he was listed on the intake form under a name that was not his legal name, that the private room had been arranged through channels she would not have recognized, and that the man currently sitting up in that bed with a clear view of the hallway through his partially open door had watched her carry the napkin and the butter packets through the corridor at 7:27 in the morning and had not looked away. She did not know any of this. She found out what she did know at 9:45. Darlene Sykes came to find her at the medication station with a specific expression on her face. It was the expression of a woman about to do something she had been directed to do and had decided to do correctly even if she did not entirely agree with it. Not a comfortable expression. Professional one. "My office," Darlene said. "When you have a second." Grace finished labeling the medication cup she was working on, capped it, and followed her. Darlene's office was a small room at the end of the nursing station with a window that looked into the hallway and a desk covered in the organized way of someone who respected paperwork even when the paperwork frustrated her. She sat behind it. Grace sat across from her and folded her hands in her lap and waited. Darlene said, "Room 411. Grace said, "Yes. The floor coordinator saw you go in at 7:30 with something on a napkin, 2 pieces of toast, and butter packets from the family kitchenette." Walter Odom has an active NPO order. I'm aware of the order. Darlene looked at her steadily. She was not a cruel woman. She was a system woman, which was a different thing, and the difference mattered more in some moments than others. Grace, she said, you know I can't. He's palliative, Darlene. He asked me for toast. His wife made toast for 42 years, and she's been gone for 3, and his family hasn't come. He hasn't been able to eat since Friday. The swallowing eval keeps getting pushed back, and it isn't going to change his treatment plan in any meaningful way. He ate 2 pieces of toast, and he was comfortable for the first time in days. Darlene pressed her hands flat on the desk. That is not your determination to make. Somebody has to make it. Yes, and the protocol exists so that the somebody is not a floor nurse acting alone on a Tuesday morning. Grace looked at her steadily. He said the nurses here are kind, but nobody makes toast. Darlene closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them, something behind her expression had shifted. A small, quiet movement. A surface against another surface. The floor coordinator filed a report. It's already in the system. The director of nursing has been notified. All right, Grace said. This isn't the first documented deviation on this floor in 4 months. Grace. The last time was asking whether the hourly alarm checks on a patient who hadn't slept in 4 nights could be done without the alarm waking her. That was the first time. The policy was designed for a general ward, not a palliative floor at the end of someone's life. Darlene was quiet. Outside the window, a nurse passed in the hallway pushing a cart, looking at something on a tablet. The ordinary machinery of the floor continuing its ordinary revolutions. The director is coming up at 11, Darlene said finally. He asked me to tell you to be available. I'll be available, Grace said. She went back to the floor and did her job for the next hour and 15 minutes with the focused attention she always brought to it. Because the 11 o'clock meeting was not yet real in the way that the future is never fully real, and her patients were real right now and they required what they required. She checked on Walter at 10:30. He was sleeping. His face was relaxed in a way it had not been when she'd found him at 7:15. She stood in the doorway and looked at him for a moment and then went to her next patient. The director of nursing was a man named Paul Garrett. He had been at Meridian for 4 years, had come with the Halcyon acquisition in a role specifically created to standardize practices across Halcyon-managed facilities, and he wore the careful professional effect of a man who had been trained in difficult conversations. He had a way of leaning slightly forward that communicated engagement while his eyes did something more administrative. Grace had interacted with him 3 times before this meeting and had come away each time with the sense of a man who was good at appearing to care without the apparatus behind it that made caring functional. The meeting was in the small conference room on the 3rd floor, attended by Garrett, Darlene, and a woman from Human Resources named Sandra Lynn who had a notepad and the particular stillness of someone who had attended enough of these to know that the most useful thing she could do was record what happened accurately. Garrett said, "Sit down, Grace." She sat. He said, "I've reviewed the incident report. I want to give you the opportunity to walk me through it in your own words." She told him. She told it the same way she had told Darlene, clearly and without apology, because there was nothing in the account that required softening, and softening it would be its own kind of dishonesty. Garrett listened with the posture of listening. When she finished, he said, "I appreciate your candor," which she recognized as a phrase that preceded something the speaker did not want to say directly. A patient under an active dietary restriction received unauthorized food from nursing staff. That's the fact we're dealing with. He was comfortable for the first time in 3 days. Grace. His voice shifted slightly. The NPO order exists because the swallowing evaluation hasn't cleared him. If Mr. Odom had aspirated on that toast, the liability. He didn't aspirate. He ate 2 pieces of toast and he slept. You don't know that he wouldn't have. That's precisely the point. She looked at him. She said, "How long have you been a nurse, Paul?" A small silence. Sandra Lynn's pen stopped moving on the notepad. Garrett said, "That's not relevant here." "No," she said. "It's not." She held his gaze. "I've been a nurse for 6 years. 3 on this floor. I have sat with 43 palliative patients in that time. I understand aspiration risk. I understood it when I made that toast. What I also understood was that Walter Odom is 79 years old and has maybe 3 weeks left and his family hasn't visited and his wife is gone, and he asked me for the thing she used to make him every morning. I made a judgment. I would make it again. The room was quiet. Darlene was looking at the table. Garrett said, I understand you feel strongly about this. She did not say anything to that. Meridian operates under protocols that exist to protect both patients and the institution. When individual staff members begin making unilateral determinations about which protocols apply to which patients, we lose the ability to guarantee consistent care. This is the second documented deviation from protocol in 4 months. The first was asking that a woman not be woken by an alarm every hour. Both represent a pattern of substituting individual judgment for established procedure. She looked at him. She said, Yes, they do. He held her gaze for a moment. He had prepared for argument and had not prepared for agreement. He said, Given the pattern and the severity of today's incident, the hospital's position is that we need to terminate the employment relationship, effective today. You'll receive your final paycheck and accrued PTO by direct deposit within 5 business days. Benefits continue through the end of the month. Darlene did not look up from the table. Sandra Lynn wrote something on her notepad. Grace sat with her hands folded in her lap and felt the specific sensation of a floor dropping away. Not the floor under her chair, but something more structural than that, the floor of a life she had built and knew how to stand on. 6 years. 3 on this floor. 43 patients. Walter Odom sleeping in room 411 with toast in his stomach and his wife's memory intact. She said, Is there anything else? Garrett said, HR will provide the exit documentation. Darlene will arrange for your personal items. She stood up. She looked at Darlene, who was still looking at the table. She did not say anything to Darlene, because there was nothing useful to say and everything true would make it worse for both of them. She said, I'd like to go say goodbye to Mr. Odom before I leave. Garrett started to speak. Sandra Lynn looked up. Darlene finally raised her head. Grace looked at Garrett with the same steadiness she had looked at him with all morning. He doesn't have family here. I'm going to tell him goodbye. A pause. Garrett said, 5 minutes. She went. Walter was awake when she pushed open the door to room 411. He looked at her and he read her face the way people do when they have lived long enough to know what certain expressions mean before the words arrive. He said, They found out. She came and sat in the visitor's chair, the one that had been in the same position for 11 days. She sat in it for the first time. I'm leaving today, she said. He looked at her for a moment. His eyes were very clear. She had come to understand that about him, that the quality of his eyes was the truest thing in his face, readable even when the rest of him was unreliable. Because of me, he said. Because of my choice, she said. It was the same thing, but the distinction mattered and she meant for him to have it. I knew the rules. I decided what mattered more. That's mine to carry. He was quiet for a moment. She said, Is there someone I can call for you before I go? Someone who should know where you are. He was quiet for a long time. Outside the window a cloud moved across the October sky and the room shifted from pale gold to gray and back again in the slow way that light moved on mornings that were not in a hurry. Robert knows where I am, he said. He said it with the carefulness she had learned from him, the quiet mercy he extended daily to the people who had let him down. They have their lives. She pressed her lips together. She did not say what she was thinking about Robert and Patricia, because it was not her information and it would serve no purpose except the satisfaction of having said it, and she was not in the business of satisfaction today. You were good company, Walter said. He looked at her with those clear eyes. Better than you know. She stood. She put her hand over his for a moment. Not the clinical grip, not the professional pat, just a hand over a hand, the oldest form of acknowledgement one human being could offer another. He said, Grace. It was the first time he had used her name without the formal prefix, the way patients shifted after enough time together. You did right. She said. I'll be all right. He said. I know you will. I wasn't worried about you. He paused. I was worried about whoever comes after you. She looked at him for a moment. This 79-year-old man with his clear eyes and his extraordinary gentleness toward the people who had failed him. She wanted to say something equal to the moment. She did not have the words for it. She squeezed his hand once and let go and went to the door. She did not look back, because if she did she was going to lose the composure she was holding carefully in both hands, and she needed to hold it a little longer. In the hallway, she walked past room 412. The door was slightly open, the same as it had been all morning. She did not look in. She was thinking about Walter's hand under hers, about the window, about 42 years of toast on a Tuesday morning, and she walked past room 412 with her eyes straight ahead and did not notice the stillness on the other side of the door, and did not know that the stillness had a name. She went to the locker room and cleared out her things. A jacket, a pair of shoes in a tote bag, a photograph she had taped inside the locker door in her first year and kept there since, a picture of her mother and her grandmother taken at Christmas sometime in the early 90s, her grandmother laughing at something outside the frame of the shot, her whole face open with it. She looked at that photograph for a moment. Then she put it in her bag. She unclipped her badge from her scrubs and set it on the bench. She looked at it there. 6 years of her name and her face laminated and clipped and worn and now set down on a bench in a locker room. She picked up her bag and went to the elevator. The lobby of Meridian Medical Center was all glass and neutral carpet, the redesigned version that had come with the halcyon purchase. Institutional, clean, corporate, reassuring. She walked through it and the automatic doors opened and the October air came at her, crisp and carrying the smell of leaves and the cold that was coming in from the mountains to the west. She had always loved that smell. It was the smell of Asheville in autumn. Her mother's kitchen with the windows cracked, her grandmother in the back garden turning the soil over before the frost. She sat down on the front steps. She had not intended to. Her car was in the staff lot around the side of the building and the sensible thing was to go to it and drive somewhere and begin working out the next thing. But she sat on the steps for a minute because she needed 1 minute before the next thing arrived. She thought about the rent, $975 due in 8 days. She thought about the $2,340 in her checking account, more than she usually kept there because she had been careful all autumn, and which now had to stretch across an unknown amount of time rather than the expected 2 weeks until the next paycheck. She thought about her student loans, the income-based repayment that would adjust to her new income, which meant a form to file. She was good with forms. She would file the form. She thought about Walter Odom in room 411. Sleeping, having eaten toast. 3 weeks left in a room where no one had sat in the visitor's chair until this morning. She thought about what he had said. I wasn't worried about you. I was worried about whoever comes after you. She sat with that for a moment, the specific kind of grief that came from being told you had mattered in a place you were no longer going to be. Car pulled up to the entrance. Black, long, idling in the quiet way expensive cars idled. The driver got out and came around and opened the rear passenger door and stood beside it without looking at anything in particular. She registered it the way you registered things that weren't for you. She was thinking about her mother in Asheville, about whether to call her today or wait until she had the shape of a plan, because her mother would want to help and Grace was going to thank her and decline, and she would rather decline with something in hand than just with her hands empty. Her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. A text from a number she did not recognize. She looked at it because it was there. Ms. Navarro. My name is James Calloway. I was a patient on the 4th floor this morning. I wonder if you would be willing to speak with me. I realize that's an unusual request. I'll be in the lobby of the Calloway Riverside Hotel at noon if you'd like to talk. I understand completely if you don't. She read it twice. She looked at the time. 10:58. She did not know any patient named James Calloway. She had not been assigned to a James Calloway. She turned the name over the way you turned a strange object to understand its shape, and the only thing it produced was the awareness that Calloway was also the name of the city she was sitting in, which felt either like a coincidence or like something that was not a coincidence, and she could not yet tell which. She looked up at the black car still idling at the curb. The driver was looking at her now. Not demanding, not approaching, just looking, with the particular calm of someone who has been told to watch for a person and has found them. He looked at her. Then he looked at the open door of the car. Then back at her. Grace Navarro sat on the steps of the hospital that had just fired her for making toast and looked at the car and the driver and the open door in the October light, and she felt the specific weight of a decision that was not going to get easier with more time. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. She stood. She picked up her bag. She adjusted it on her shoulder and walked down the steps toward the car with the same deliberate steadiness she had carried into every hard room she had ever entered. Because the quality that had gotten her to this moment was not going to stop being useful just because the moment was frightening. The driver said nothing. He simply held the door. She got in. The interior was cool and quiet, the particular sealed silence of a vehicle designed to make the outside world feel very far away. The leather was dark and the glass was tinted, and on the seat beside her was a folded piece of paper with her name written on it in handwriting that was small and precise, and that told her, the way handwriting sometimes could, something about the person who had written it. She picked it up. She unfolded it. Grace, I have been in room 412 since Sunday. I saw what you did this morning and I saw what it cost you. There are things I would like to explain in person, if you'll give me the time. The hotel is 10 minutes from here. I will answer every question you have. You owe me nothing and I owe you more than I can put in a note. J.C. She read it once. She read it again. The car was already moving. She looked out the tinted window at Callaway moving past, the brick storefronts, the coffee shop where she went on Sunday mornings when she had the time, the corner where the farmer's market set up in summer with its particular smell of cut flowers and kettle corn and something sweet she had never successfully identified. Her city on an ordinary Tuesday in October, carrying on without her in the way that cities do, completely indifferent to the specific gravity of individual moments. She looked down at the note in her hands. I owe you more than I can put in a note. She thought about what that meant from a man whose name she did not know in a car she had chosen to get into at 11 o'clock on the morning. She had just lost her job for feeding a dying patient toast. She thought about the specific chain of choices that had brought her to this seat, each one clearly visible from the one before it. Every choice hers. Every one of them, she knew without question, one she would make again. The car turned toward the river. The Callaway Riverside Hotel sat on the east side of downtown where the broad river made its long bend, and the old textile mill buildings had been converted into restaurants and boutique offices that charged 3 times what the original tenants had paid and served none of the original purpose. Grace had driven past it hundreds of times and gone in exactly 0 times. It was the kind of hotel that occupied a different economic geography than her own, the kind you clocked as a landmark without ever considering it a destination. The car pulled up at 11:12. The driver came around and opened her door without being asked, which she already knew was the kind of thing that told you something without saying anything directly. She got out. The air off the river was colder than the air on the hospital steps had been, or maybe it was just that she was more aware of cold things now. She went through the glass doors. The lobby was the kind of space designed to make you immediately aware of what it cost to be in it. Warm stone floors, high ceilings, the particular quiet of a room where every surface had been chosen to absorb sound rather than bounce it. A woman at the front desk looked up with the practiced warmth of someone trained to make every person feel expected. A porter moved through the far end of the lobby with the unhurried precision of someone who had never once been told to hurry. She did not see him at first. She scanned the lobby the way she scanned a new floor on her first day of a shift, methodically, left to right, reading the space for its information. Seating areas with low chairs and small tables. A fireplace against the far wall, unlit but arranged as if it had been recently used. A bar that was not yet open. And then, near the window that faced the river, a man sitting in a high-backed chair with a cup of something in front of him and his hands resting on the arms of the chair with the stillness of a person who had been waiting long enough that they had stopped expecting anything to happen and had made peace with the waiting itself. She recognized him before she was close enough to be sure. The white hair, the particular quality of the stillness. He looked different outside the hospital bed. He was dressed in dark trousers and a gray sweater that she registered automatically as the kind of simple garment that cost more than it admitted to, and he sat with the upright carriage of a man who had decided long ago that posture was not optional. He was looking at the river through the window with an expression that was private enough that for a moment she felt she was seeing something she had not been meant to see. Then he turned and looked at her, and the private expression was replaced by something more deliberate, attentive, careful. He stood when she came toward him. He was taller than she had registered from the hallway outside room 412, which she realized now she had not fully registered because she had not fully looked. He extended his hand. "Grace," he said. "Thank you for coming." She shook his hand. It was the hand of someone who had worked with them at some point in their life, not a soft hand, which she had not expected. "I haven't decided what I think about any of this yet," she said. He said, "That's completely fair." He gestured to the chair across from his. "Sit, please." She sat. A server appeared within seconds, which was the kind of thing that happened in places like this and that she noted without comment. She ordered coffee. The server disappeared with the specific efficiency of someone who understood that their presence was welcome only in useful increments. She looked at the man across from her. In the hospital bed he had been a patient, which meant she had understood the relational geography instinctively. Here the geography was undefined, and that undefined quality was something she was going to have to hold carefully. She put her bag on the floor beside her chair, folded her hands in her lap, and said, "Tell me who you are and why I'm here." He looked at her for a moment. Not the slow look of someone deciding how much to reveal, but the considered look of someone deciding where to start. "My name isn't James Calloway," he said. He said it plainly, without apology, which she found she appreciated more than a preamble would have given her. "That's the name I checked in under. I do that when I need a hospital to behave normally around me." He paused. "Hospitals don't behave normally around me when they know who I am." She held his gaze. "Why would a hospital behave differently around you?" He looked at her steadily. "Because I own them." The server returned with her coffee. She wrapped both hands around the cup and did not drink it yet, and looked at the man across from her who had just told her, without any particular drama, that he owned hospitals. She said, "How many?" He said, 31. Across 9 states. He paused. 2 of them in North Carolina. She thought about this for a moment. She said, "Is Meridian one of them?" "Not currently," he said. "That's part of why I was here." She looked at him. "Part of it." "Part of it," he said. He picked up his cup, which appeared to be tea, and held it without drinking. "I've been doing this for a long time, going into hospitals without identifying myself. 2-3 days at most. Long enough to understand what the floor actually feels like from the inside. How staff treat patients when they believe no one is watching who matters. How the protocols function in practice versus how they read on paper." "And what does that tell you?" she said. "Usually it tells me things I already suspected and can now verify." He set the cup down. "Occasionally it tells me something I wasn't looking for." The river moved beyond the window, brown and slow in the October light. A single kayaker cut across the near bend and disappeared around it. The fireplace sat unlit and arranged. She said, "You were in room 412 for 2 days. Since Sunday," he said. "And you saw me in the hallway." "I saw you many times in the hallway," he said. He held her gaze. "That's what I want to explain to you. Not just this morning. The 2 days before it as well." She waited. He said, "Sunday afternoon I watched the floor for approximately 6 hours before anyone came to check on me in a way that was not procedural. Temperature, blood pressure, medication. Correct, efficient, completed. No one sat down. No one asked a question that required more than a yes or no answer. 2 nurses avoided eye contact when they came in the room, which meant they had learned to treat patients as tasks rather than people, which is what happens on floors that are chronically understaffed and managed by someone who measures throughput." He paused. "That's not a criticism. That's what the numbers produce." She said nothing. "Sunday evening, around 7 o'clock, you came out of a room 3 doors down from mine. The patient in that room, I don't know his name, was agitated. I could hear it from where I was. He was asking for something repeatedly and the request was being redirected. Standard de-escalation. Correct technique." He looked at her steadily. You went in after the other nurse came out. You were in there for 11 minutes. When you came out, he was quiet. He needed someone to stay with him until the medication settled, she said. It came out with the flatness of something she had done many times and did not consider remarkable. 11 minutes at the end of an 8-hour shift, he said. For a patient who was not on your assignment. She looked at him. She did not say anything. Monday morning, he continued. I watched you at the nursing station for about 40 minutes between 7 and 8. I watched how you interacted with 4 different patients as they came to the desk or as you passed their rooms. I watched how you spoke to a man whose family had called 3 times in 1 hour and who was frightened in the way that people are frightened when they understand the news they've been given but cannot yet make themselves believe it. I watched how you spoke to him. He paused. You spoke to him like a person, not like a patient, not like a task, like a person in a specific situation who deserved a specific answer. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, a couple walked along the river path below the hotel window, their dog pulling ahead on a leash, and they were laughing about it. She said, You're describing my job. He said, I'm describing what your job looks like when someone actually does it. I've been in enough hospitals to know the difference. She picked up her coffee and drank some of it. It was very good coffee, which she noted and set aside. She said, And this morning, the toast. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had a different quality than it had had for the preceding account, something slightly less organized, as though the toast this morning occupied a different category for him than the 2 days of observation. I heard him through the wall, he said. Room 411 and room 412 share a wall. I'd been listening to him since Sunday. The way he spoke when the nurses came in. The things he said, what he asked for, what he didn't ask for. He stopped. I could tell you about the walls in a hospital, the things you learn from the other side of them. But what I want to tell you about is this morning. She looked at him. I heard him say that his wife made toast, he said. And I heard the silence after it. And then I watched through the door as you went to the family kitchen at the end of the hall and came back with a napkin. And I watched through the door as you closed his door behind you and pulled a chair to his bedside. He looked at her directly. And I want to tell you that I have been in 31 hospitals in the last 12 years, and I have never once seen a nurse close a door, pull a chair, and sit down next to a patient the way a person sits next to someone they actually care about. Grace looked at the table. She was not going to let anything show on her face that she did not intend to show. But she needed a moment before she was sure of that. She said, He's been on that floor for 11 days. His family hasn't come. I know, he said. He asked me for toast. He told me the nurses were kind, but nobody makes toast. She looked up. That's not a complicated thing to respond to. It's just toast. It's not the toast, he said quietly. She knew what he meant. She did not say so, because she did not know yet who this man was or what he wanted from her, and she had learned through years of working with people in crisis that the most useful skill you could develop was the ability to receive information without immediately organizing it into a response. She said, You told me your name isn't James Calloway. It isn't. What is it? He was quiet for a moment. The specific quiet of a person who is deciding whether the moment has arrived. She had seen that quality of quiet before in patients who were deciding whether to tell her how bad the pain actually was, and in Darlene that morning before she said my office, and in Walter yesterday when she had asked whether he wanted her to call Robert. The moment before a person decided to be truthful about something they had been holding. James Hargrove, he said. My full name is James Elliot Hargrove. She heard the name. She placed it in the approximate location where it sat in her memory, which was the particular place where she kept information she had encountered peripherally, in the way you encountered the names of people who operated at a distance from your daily world but whose existence you had registered through the medium of news and professional reading. She had the name at the edge of it, not the shape of the whole thing, just the edge. Hargrove Capital, she said, came out slowly. He looked at her steadily. Hargrove Capital. She was pulling the shape of it now, the way memory worked when you gave it a proper thread to follow. A healthcare investment firm. Something about hospital acquisitions, about a fund that had grown significantly in the past decade, about a name that came up in the kind of industry articles she had sometimes skimmed when she was doing research on Halcyon's purchase of Meridian and trying to understand who the new ownership actually was and what they wanted. She said, "You're evaluating Halcyon Health Group." "Among other things," he said. "Yes." She sat with that for a moment. "And Meridian is one of Halcyon's facilities. One of 23. She looked at him. She was doing the calculation that was not really a calculation, just the simple act of placing the pieces she had in the order they fit. A man who owned 31 hospitals had spent 2 days in room 412 at Meridian, one of 23 hospitals owned by a company he was apparently evaluating. He had watched her work. He had watched her get fired. And he had sent a car to the front steps of the hospital within 20 minutes of her walking out of it. She said, "What do you want from me?" He said, "To start with, I want to tell you what I saw. Not just this morning. Over 2 days, what I actually observed on that floor. And then I want to ask you some things. And then I want to make you an offer, and you will decide what you think of it." "You could have called," she said. "You had my phone number." "I wanted to be in the same room," he said. "Things that matter should be said in the same room." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "All right." He told her what he had seen. He told it methodically, as a man who had been accumulating observations with a purpose and was now organizing them into an account. He told her about the floor staffing, 3 nurses for 14 patients on a shift that by the hospital's own posted standards should have had 4, and about the downstream consequences of that ratio that she would have recognized because she had been living them for 3 years. He told her about the dietary service, the breakfast cart arriving 18 minutes late on both Monday and Tuesday, and what late food service meant for patients managing medication timing with meal schedules. He told her about the call. Light response times he had clocked from his room, which ranged from 4 minutes to 22, and about what 22 minutes meant for a patient in pain waiting to know someone was coming. He told her all of this with the precision of a man who had been doing this for a long time and who had developed over that time the capacity to see what floors looked like from the bed, not the desk. And he told her about what he had seen her do against all of that. The 11 minutes on Sunday evening. The phone call handled at the desk on Monday, where she had stepped away to take it quietly because the conversation required more privacy than the open station allowed. The way she had been in room 411 every morning at a consistent time, not because it appeared to be the most medically urgent room on the floor, but because she had assessed it as the room where medical urgency was not the only kind of urgency present. He said, "I've been doing these visits for 12 years. I've seen nurses who are technically correct, who follow every protocol exactly as it's written and deliver care that is safe and appropriate, and that leaves patients feeling like they've been processed rather than seen. I've seen nurses who break protocols carelessly, who substitute their own preferences for institutional judgment without the knowledge base to support that substitution. And I've seen, much more rarely than any system should produce, nurses who understand that a protocol is a tool and not a replacement for the judgment that the tool was designed to support." He looked at her. "You are the 3rd person in 12 years who I would describe that way. The other 2 now run floors." She looked at him steadily. She was listening to everything he was saying, and she was also listening to the thing underneath it, which was the shape of where this was going, and she was keeping that shape at arm's length for now because she had learned to be careful about the things that felt too good to be true before they were verified. She said, "You watched me for 2 days and I was fired on the 2nd day. If I'm the 3rd person in 12 years you'd describe that way, the bar isn't high." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "No, the bar is very high. Most people don't clear it. The system doesn't select for people who clear it. The system selects for people who are compliant and consistent, which are valuable qualities that produce nothing like what I watched you do in room 411 this morning." She said, "Most of the nurses on that floor are good nurses. Yes, I'm not saying otherwise." He held her gaze. "I'm saying you are something more than that, and the institution you were in until this morning did not have the structure to recognize what it had, and when it came into conflict with what you had, it resolved the conflict by removing you. That's what most institutions do. That's what Halcyon does systematically, and it is one of the significant reasons I am in Callaway this week." The fireplace across the lobby was still unlit. The river beyond the window was still brown and slow. A different couple was on the path now, not walking, just standing at the railing looking at the water, and their stillness had the quality of two people who had been in the same space long enough to be comfortable in silence. She said, "What is the offer?" He looked at her with an expression that was direct and measured and that told her the offer had been arranged already. Had been arranged before this conversation, possibly before the car reached the hospital steps. He was a man who prepared. She recognized that quality because she shared it. He said, "I'm acquiring Halcyon Health Group. The process has been in motion for 7 months. It will complete within 90 days. When it does, those 23 hospitals become part of Hargrove Capital's portfolio, including Meridian." He paused. "Including the oncology floor." She was very still. "One of the things I do in every acquisition," he said, "is identify the people on the ground who understand what care actually costs, not financially but humanly. Who understand the difference between a floor that functions and a floor that heals. Those people rarely hold administrative positions, because administrative positions select for different qualities. They are usually exactly where you were this morning, doing the work at the level of the work invisibly." He looked at her. "I want to offer you a position as a clinical quality director. It's a new role I'm building across the Hargrove portfolio. Its function is to identify the gap between what care looks like on paper and what it looks like from the bed. To give a formal voice to the kind of judgment you exercised this morning. To build the systems that don't currently exist for the 43,000 nurses in our network who are doing what you do and getting reprimanded for it or burning out from it or leaving the profession entirely." The room was very quiet. She looked at him. She said, "You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a position that doesn't exist yet, that you would build, with the authority and the resources to build it in a way that means something." She looked at the river. She looked at her hands. She looked at the man across the table from her with his quiet certainty and his 12 years of hospital beds and his 31 facilities and his acquisition in progress and his offer that had the exact shape of the thing she had been trying to do for 6 years with no structural support and no authority and 2 documented protocol deviations and her final paycheck coming by direct deposit within 5 business days. She said, "I don't know you." "No," he said, "you don't. I don't take positions from people I don't know." Based on a conversation in a hotel lobby the same morning I was fired. "I wouldn't expect you to," he said, "and I wouldn't trust the judgment of someone who would." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and withdrew a card and placed it on the table. "My assistant's name is Claire. She will provide you with everything you need to verify everything I've told you. 12 years of documentation on the evaluation program. Audited financials on the acquisition. References from the 2 people I mentioned, who are both reachable. And the names of every physician and administrative director at the facilities in our network who would know my name and could tell you whether the account I've given you about how I operate is accurate." She looked at the card on the table. It had a name and a phone number and nothing else, which was the kind of card that understood its own purpose completely. She did not pick it up yet. She said, "Why didn't you do something this morning? Before I left the building." She looked at him. "You were in room 412. You had my phone number by the time I walked out of that conference room, which means you had access to the hospital staff records, which means you were already moving. Why did you let me walk out?" He was quiet for a moment. It was the quiet of a person who has asked themselves the same question. "Because stopping it required me to identify myself," he said. "And identifying myself in that building, in that moment, in the middle of an active acquisition evaluation, would have changed everything about what I was doing there. Every administrator in that building would have known within an hour, and the thing I was measuring would have become impossible to measure." He paused. "I made a calculation. I made it quickly, in the moment, and I am not entirely comfortable with it. I want you to know that. I could have stopped it. I chose not to. I chose the car and the note instead." She looked at him for a long moment. She was testing the account the way she had learned to test things, feeling for the places where it didn't hold together, and the account held together. The uncomfortable part of it held together especially, which was in her experience the most reliable sign of a truthful account. People who were constructing a story smoothed the uncomfortable parts. People who were reporting one left them rough. She said, "What happens to Walter?" He looked at her with slight attention, the micro-adjustment of a person recalibrating. She said, "Walter Odom, room 411. I left him this morning and I'm not assigned to him anymore, and he is 11 days into a palliative situation with no family presence and 3 weeks left. What happens to him?" He held her gaze. He said, "Tell me what he needs." She said, "He needs someone to sit in that chair. He needs someone to check on him in the mornings before the floor is busy and the protocol is running. He needs someone to know his name and use it." She paused. "He needs someone to make toast." Something moved through his expression. Not sentimentality, which would have been easy. Something with more cost in it than that. He said, "I'm going back to the hospital this afternoon. I have clearance for another day as a patient while the cardiac team completes the monitoring protocol. Room 412 is still mine until tomorrow morning." She looked at him. He said, "I will knock on the door to room 411 this afternoon. I will introduce myself as the man from across the hall who has been eating the same terrible eggs for 2 days and would like some company." He paused. "I'm told I'm reasonable company when I'm not sitting in a board meeting." She said, "He'll see through the eggs line immediately. He's been eating those eggs longer than you have." The corner of his mouth moved. It was a small movement barely registered. "Then I'll tell him the truth. That I've been across the hall and I didn't introduce myself soon enough, and I'm correcting that now." She looked at him for a long moment. She was still holding the shape of this morning in her, all of it, the fluorescent light of the conference room and Paul Garrett's prepared effect and Darlene looking at the table and Walter's hand under hers and the way he had said "you did right" with the conviction of a man who knew the difference. She was holding it all, and she was sitting across from a stranger who owned 31 hospitals and was offering to go across the hall and sit with a dying man he had never met because she had asked him to. She reached forward and picked up the card. She said, "I'll call Claire." He said, "Good." She put the card in her bag and picked up her coffee and drank it, and they sat for a moment in the particular quiet of two people who have just agreed to something that neither of them can yet fully see the shape of. Then she said, "What is it about the wall?" He looked at her. "I'm sorry. You said you could tell me about the walls in a hospital. The things you learn from the other side of them." She looked at him. "What did you learn from the wall you shared with Walter?" He was quiet for a long moment. The river outside the window caught a thin shift of October sunlight and held it briefly, and then it was gone. He said, "I heard him talking to someone on the phone last night, late, after 10. I'm not sure who. A woman's voice on the other end, a recorded message at first, and then it went to voicemail. He talked to the voicemail. He talked about the hardware store his father owned and about a summer he spent in the mountains the year he turned 22 and about the way Iris made coffee in the morning, the way she always burned it slightly and never acknowledged that she burned it, and he never said anything because the slightly burnt coffee was hers and that was enough. He stopped. He talked for about 4 minutes and then he said good night and hung up. Grace was very still. He said, "I've been in enough rooms on the other side of enough walls to know what that sounds like. A man talking to his wife's voicemail because he kept the number alive after she was gone, and he talks to it the way he used to talk to her." He looked at the river. "I've been lying on my side of that wall for 2 days and I did nothing useful with what I heard. And this morning you made the man toast and sat with him in the chair no one had sat in and held his hand and told him he did right." He looked at her. "That is the distance between what I do and what you do. And it is a distance I am not sure I fully understood until this morning." She did not know what to say to that. She was not sure it needed a response. She held it the way you held things that were true and large and that needed room rather than comment. She said, "I should go." "Yes." He stood when she stood, which was a formal gesture that in another context might have felt performative but did not feel that way here. She said, "What are you going to tell the hospital about leaving room 412? He said, "My real cardiologist will call this afternoon to arrange a transfer for continued monitoring at a facility in Charlotte. Standard procedure. There will be no announcement." He paused. "The people at Meridian who need to understand what's coming will understand it when the acquisition process enters its final phase. That will happen in approximately 6 weeks." She looked at him. She said, "And Paul Garrett." He held her gaze for one moment. He said, Paul Garrett is an organizational symptom. He does what the structure he's inside tells him to do, and the structure tells him to protect Halcyon's liability exposure and standardize the hospitals he manages until they produce consistent outputs at reduced cost. He is not the problem. He is the result of the problem. The problem is what we're going to fix. He paused. The what includes you if you decide to accept the offer. She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her bag and she said, "I'll call Claire today." She walked through the lobby. The woman at the front desk looked up and gave the same practiced warmth she had given on the way in, which Grace received with a small nod, and then she was through the glass doors and into the October air again with the cold off the river and the card in her bag and the morning sitting on her like something she was not yet done with. She stood on the hotel steps for a moment and looked at the street. The city was fully in its midday rhythm, the lunch crowd beginning to move, the delivery trucks double-parked, the particular texture of a Tuesday that did not know it was not ordinary. She took out her phone. She looked at it for a moment. Then she called the number for Claire. The call was answered on the second ring. The woman's voice was efficient and warm and clearly accustomed to being the first voice people heard after meeting James Hargrove for the first time. She said, "Ms. Navarro, I've been expecting your call. I can send the verification package to your email within the hour, or I can walk you through it now if you prefer." Grace said, "Send it. I'll read it thoroughly and I'll have questions." Of course. His calendar is available for a follow-up conversation Thursday or Friday at your preference. There's no deadline on your end. Take the time you need. She said, "One more thing." "Yes." Walter Odom. He's a patient at Meridian, Oncology floor, room 411. He's palliative. His family isn't there. I want someone checking on him. Not medically, humanly. Every day until, she stopped. Until he doesn't need it anymore. A brief pause on the line. Not the pause of someone uncertain, but the pause of someone noting something carefully. "I understand. I'll arrange it." "Not a service," Grace said. "Not a check-in protocol. Someone who knows his name. Someone who asks him things and actually wants the answers." "I understand, Ms. Navarro." The voice was steady and meant what it said. "I'll handle it personally until we have the right person in place." Grace said, "Thank you." She ended the call. She walked to where the driver had parked and got in when he opened the door, because it seemed now like the kind of thing she was simply accepting as a feature of this day, and she gave him her address on Marsh Street, and she sat in the cool quiet of the car and watched Calloway move past the tinted window and thought about 31 hospitals and 43,000 nurses and the position that didn't exist yet that she would build. She thought about Walter talking to Iris's voicemail at 10 o'clock at night for 4 minutes about burnt coffee. She thought about the chair in room 411 that had been in the same position for 11 days and that she had sat in this morning for the first time and that she was not going to be able to sit in anymore. She thought about her mother in Asheville who she was going to call this evening and who was going to say, "Grace, honey," and then listen. She thought about the photograph in her bag, her grandmother laughing at something outside the frame. She thought about what James Hargrove had said, the distance between what I do and what you do. And she turned that over carefully because the distance was real and she knew it and she had lived on her side of it for 6 years. But there was something in the way he had described it, the honesty of it, that told her the distance was not comfortable for him, which was a different thing from most powerful people's relationship to their distance from the ground. Most powerful people did not notice the wall. They sat on their side of it and they did not hear the things the person on the other side was saying to the voicemail because they were not listening. He had heard it. He had been 2 days on his side of the wall and he had heard every word. She did not know yet what to make of that. She knew she was going to read the verification package the moment it arrived. She knew she was going to call every reference on the list. She knew she was going to take Thursday and sit with the numbers and the offer and the shape of what it would mean, and she was going to be methodical about it the way she was methodical about everything she could control. She had learned a long time ago that being methodical about the controllable things was how you survived the uncontrollable ones. She knew one other thing, which was that when she sat down at her kitchen table tonight in her apartment on Marsh Street, in the room with 12 things on the walls and the folding table and the sewing machine she had used twice, she was going to feel the specific weight of today in its full entirety for the first time, without the motion of the morning carrying her through it. She was going to feel the conference room and Walter's hand and the note in the car and the lobby and all of it, and it was going to be a lot to feel. She had felt large things before. She knew how to hold them. The car stopped in front of her building. She got out and thanked the driver, who nodded in the specific way of someone who had not been expecting to be thanked and was not entirely sure what to do with it, and she went inside. Her phone buzzed before she reached her door. A text from Darlene Sykes. She looked at it for a long moment before she opened it. Grace, I know you don't owe me anything. I want you to know that I went in to see Walter after you left this morning. I sat in the chair. We talked for a while. I thought you should know that. She stood in her hallway with her bag on her shoulder and her keys in her hand, and she read the text twice and felt something unlock in her chest. Not break open, just shift, the way a door shifts when it is no longer fully latched. She typed back, "Thank you, Darlene. That means something." She put her key in the lock and went inside and set her bag on the counter and stood in her kitchen in the October afternoon light and looked at the apartment that was hers, impermanent feeling and not yet permanent and exactly what she had right now, and she thought about the word when. Not if, when. She went to the window and looked out at Marsh Street, the ordinary Tuesday afternoon of it, the parked cars and the woman with the dog and the delivery truck pulling away from the building across the street. Her phone buzzed again. An email notification. The verification package from Claire, arriving in the hour she had been promised. She made coffee. She sat down at her table. She opened the email. She read for a long time. What she found in the documents was not what people found when they were looking for reassurance and received it. It was what people found when they were looking for the truth, and the truth was more complicated and more credible than reassurance would have been. The financial structure of Hargrove Capital was verifiable through 3 public filings she pulled up independently and cross-referenced against the documents Claire had sent. The acquisition of Halcyon Health Group was documented in a pre-closing agreement dated 7 months prior. The evaluation program, the anonymous hospital visits, was 12 years old and had a paper trail that went back to a documented incident at a Hargrove facility in Tennessee where a patient had died not from medical error but from the particular failure of care that happens when systems are optimized for efficiency in ways that remove the human margin. She read that document carefully. It was a post-incident analysis that did not soften what had happened and did not assign blame to individuals and did not recommend punitive measures. It recommended structural change, and then it documented 7 years of attempting to implement that change within existing frameworks, and then it documented the decision to stop working within the existing frameworks and to build something different from the outside in. That was 12 years ago. She read until the light outside her window had shifted to the later, lower quality of late afternoon, and then she sat back and looked at the table and thought about what she had read. She picked up her phone and called the first reference on the list. A woman named Dr. Patricia Owens in Houston who answered on the 3rd ring with the clipped efficiency of someone who had been interrupted and was deciding whether the interruption was worth it. Grace said, "I'm sorry to call without advance notice. My name is Grace Navarro. I was given your name by Claire at Hargrove Capital as a reference for James Hargrove." A brief silence. Then the efficiency softened at its edges, not entirely, but enough to be noticeable. "He told me you might call," Dr. Owens said. "What do you want to know?" Grace said, "Everything that matters." Dr. Owens said, "That's going to take a few minutes." Grace said, "I have time." She did not check the clock for a long while after that. She wrote 4 pages of notes in the notebook she kept for things that required documentation. She asked the questions she had gone into the call with, and she asked the questions that the answers produced. She thanked Dr. Owens, who said, "Whatever you're deciding, decide it because it's right, not because it's impressive," which was the kind of thing that stayed with you. She called the second reference. A man named Thomas Reedy in Philadelphia, who had been a floor nurse at a Hargrove facility for 9 years before Hargrove, had put him in the first version of exactly the kind of role Grace was being offered. He talked for 37 minutes. He told her about what the role had meant, what it had cost, what it had produced. He told her about the floors he had been able to change and the floors he had not, and about what the difference looked like between those 2 kinds of outcomes. He told her about James Hargrove in a way that was neither flattering nor critical but was specific, which was the only kind of account she trusted. She thanked him. She sat in her kitchen in the blue-gray light of the early evening and she looked at her notes and she thought about 31 hospitals and the role that didn't exist yet and the 43,000 nurses and the 43 palliative patients she had sat with and the 1 man in room. For 11, who was sleeping right now, she hoped, with Darlene having sat in the chair and with James Hargrove, whose name was not James Calloway, knocking on his door this afternoon. Her phone rang, a number she now recognized. She answered it. Grace. His voice was lower than it had been in the hotel. She recognized the difference immediately. The particular quality of a voice in a hospital room, reduced to the register that hospitals required. I wanted to let you know I spoke with him. She closed her eyes for a moment. He is, as you said, very good company, he said. He told me about the hardware store his father owned. He told me about Iris. A pause. He told me about you. She pressed her hand flat on the kitchen table. The October evening was outside her window and the apartment was quiet around her. What did he say? She asked. James Hargrove said. He said you made the right call this morning. He said he knew it would cost you and you did it anyway. A pause. He said, that's the kind of person who knows what things are actually for. She sat very still with the phone against her ear and the evening outside the window and the notes from 2 reference calls in front of her and the card on the table beside them, and she felt the full weight of the day for the first time, all of it at once, the way she had known she would, and she let it be what it was. She said, tell him I said good night. He said, I will. She set the phone down. She sat there for a long time in the quiet. Then she picked up her pen, turned to a clean page in the notebook, and began writing down the questions she was going to ask on Thursday. Thursday came the way October Thursdays came in Calloway, quietly and without ceremony. The light thin and the air carrying the particular smell of leaves releasing their hold on things. Grace had been awake since 5. Not because of anxiety, though there was some of that, but because her body had its own schedule and the schedule did not negotiate with the significance of the day. She had spent Wednesday the way she spent days that required preparation. Methodically, she had reread her notes from both reference calls. She had pulled 3 public filings on Hargrove Capital and read them fully, not the summaries, the filings themselves, because the summaries told you what someone wanted you to take away and the filings told you what was actually true. She had written a list of 12 questions. She had crossed out 4 of them because the documents had already answered them. She had added 2 more that the documents had raised. She had also, on Wednesday afternoon, driven to Meridian. Not to go inside. She had parked in the visitor lot and sat in her car for 20 minutes and looked at the building. The 12 stories of it, the glass entrance, the staff lot around the side where her car had been parked every morning for 6 years. She had looked at it the way you looked at a place that had been yours and was no longer yours and tried to understand what the looking told you. What it told her was that she had loved the work inside that building even when the building had made the work harder than it needed to be. That was a distinction she needed to hold clearly before Thursday. The love was for the work. The building was just where the work had happened to live. She had driven home. She had made soup. She had slept. Thursday morning, the call was at 10. She was at her kitchen table at 9:45 with her notes and her coffee and the window showing the ordinary Marsh Street morning. And when the call connected at exactly 10 o'clock she thought, he's punctual, which was not a surprise but was a confirmation. He said, good morning. Did you sleep? She said, enough. I have 8 questions. He said, ask them. She asked them. He answered each one with the directness she had come to identify as his consistent mode. Not the directness of someone who had practiced being direct, but the directness of a person who found circuitousness exhausting and had stopped doing it. When he did not know the specific answer, he said so and told her who did and how to reach them. When an answer was complicated, he said it was complicated and then explained the complication instead of smoothing it over. The 8th question was the hardest one. She had saved it for the end because it was the one she most needed to hear answered and the most afraid of. She said, what happens if I build this role the way I believe it needs to be built and it conflicts with what your financial model requires? At some point, those 2 things are going to pull against each other. I want to know what you do when that happens. He was quiet for a moment. Not the evasive quiet of someone searching for the acceptable answer. The considered quiet of someone who had asked themselves the same question and was reporting honestly. He said, 12 years ago, a woman named Helen Park was a charge nurse at a facility we owned in Memphis. She came to me with a staffing analysis that showed our overnight ratio was creating a window of risk on the cardiac floor. The analysis was correct. Correcting it cost $340,000 annually in added labor. At the time, that facility was running a 4.2% margin. My CFO argued against it. I overruled him. He paused. Helen Park is now the chief nursing officer of our Tennessee region. The Memphis facility has not had a preventable overnight cardiac event in 11 years. A beat. That is what I do when those two things pull against each other. I take the side of the analysis. She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "All right." He said, "Is that a yes?" She looked out the window at Marsh Street. At the ordinary Thursday of it. At the city that had become hers gradually and without announcement, one coffee shop and one river bend at a time. She said, "That's a yes." The silence that followed was not empty. It had the quality of a door that had just been opened onto a room neither of them had been in before, and both of them were standing at the threshold of it, and neither of them was rushing. He said, "I'd like you to meet the team next week in Charlotte. Claire will arrange the details." She said, "One condition." He said, "Name it." She said, "The first facility I evaluate in the new role is Meridian, the oncology floor specifically." He said, "Done." She ended the call. She sat at the table for a moment with both hands flat on its surface and the October light coming through the window and the notebook open to the 8 questions, 7 of which had check marks beside them and the 8th of which she had written the word yes. She called her mother. Her mother said, "Grace, honey," and then listened for 17 minutes without interrupting, which was the thing Grace had needed without knowing how to ask for it. At the end she said, "Your grandmother would be so proud." And Grace said, "I know." And she meant it. She called Darlene. Darlene answered on the first ring, which meant she had been waiting for it. Grace told her what she was able to tell her, which was not all of it. Not the acquisition, not the 6 weeks until completion, not the full weight of what was coming. She told her she had accepted a position at a healthcare firm and that she would be back in contact when she could say more. Darlene was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you going to make things better?" Grace said, "That's the plan." Darlene said, "Good." And then, "Walter asked about you this morning. I told him you were all right." Grace said, "Thank you for sitting with him." Darlene said, "He's good company." A pause. "He told me about the hardware store. His father let him name all the drawers in the small parts cabinet. Every drawer had a label in his handwriting. He was 9 years old." Another pause. "He said it was the first time he understood that naming things made them real." Grace sat with that for a moment after she hung up. Naming things made them real. She opened her notebook to a clean page and she wrote at the top of it, in small and careful letters, the name of the role she had accepted. Clinical Quality Director. She looked at it. She thought about the 43,000 nurses. She thought about the Helen Parks who were on floors right now with analyses that had nowhere to go. She thought about the Walter Odoms and the 11-minute evenings and the covered trays and the things that cost nothing except the decision to do them. She wrote underneath the title what this is actually for. And then she began to fill the page. 3 weeks later, on a Wednesday morning in November, Walter Odom died in room 411 at Meridian Medical Center. Grace was not there. She was in Charlotte at a meeting that had started early and would run long, the first in a series of introductions that were building the scaffolding of something new. She found out through Claire, who had done exactly what she had promised and had arranged, quietly and without bureaucratic friction, for someone to check on Walter every day. Not a service person. A retired chaplain named Carl who had worked at Meridian years before the Halcyon purchase, and who still came in 3 days a week as a volunteer, and who had started stopping by room 411 with the same unhurried consistency that Grace had brought to it. Carl had been there when Walter died. He had been sitting in the chair. Grace stood in a hallway outside the Charlotte conference room and held her phone and let the information settle in her the way large things settled. Not all at once but in waves, each one carrying a different specific weight. She thought about the voicemail. She thought about the toast. She thought about what Walter had said to James. The kind of person who knows what things are actually for. She thought about 42 years of burnt coffee and a man who never said anything about it because it was hers and that was enough. She went back into the meeting. She did the work. She did it the way she always did it, which was fully, because the work was real and it required what it required, and Walter would have told her exactly that. The acquisition of Halcyon Health Group by Hargrove Capital completed on a Tuesday in December, 6 weeks after the hotel lobby and 8 days before Christmas. The announcement went out through standard channels at 9 in the morning. By 10, every administrator at every Halcyon-managed facility had received a communication from the new ownership. By 11, the phones at Meridian's administrative offices were running hot with calls that had the specific quality of calls placed by people who had just read something and needed someone to confirm that they had read it correctly. Paul Garrett read the announcement in his office on the 3rd floor. He read the part that said the new ownership would be conducting a full operational review of all 23 facilities beginning in January. He read the part that said the review would be led by a newly created clinical quality division whose mandate was to evaluate the gap between institutional protocols and patient-centered care outcomes. He read the name of the person who would lead that division. Grace Navarro, Clinical Quality Director, Hargrove Capital Health Systems. He read it twice. She did not find out what happened in Paul Garrett's office that morning. She heard about it later from Darlene, who had it from Carol at the front desk, who had it from Earl, who had the most reliable information network in the building. What she heard was that Paul Garrett had been very quiet for the remainder of that Tuesday and had submitted a request for a meeting with the incoming ownership team before the end of the week. She heard that the meeting had been granted and that it had been conducted with the professional courtesy that James Hargrove extended to everyone, which did not change the outcome of the operational review but did ensure that the outcome was delivered with more dignity than Garrett had extended to Grace on a Tuesday in October. She was not interested in his outcome as a satisfaction. She was interested in the floor. She came back to Meridian on a Thursday in January, not as a nurse, not as a terminated employee, but as the person conducting the review. She came in through the front entrance, not the side door, and she went to the 4th floor. She spent 3 days on the oncology unit. She talked to every nurse on the floor, not in a conference room, not in an evaluative meeting, but in the hallway and at the nursing station and in the break room with bad coffee and good honesty. She asked specific questions and she actually wanted the specific answers. She talked to patients. She sat in rooms. She looked at charts not for compliance but for the evidence of what the protocols were actually producing on the ground. She went into room 411 on the 2nd day. It had a different patient now. A woman named Ruth who was 64 and who had a daughter who came every afternoon and sat in the chair. Grace was glad about the daughter. She was glad about the chair being used. She stood in the doorway for a moment before she moved on. She was not going to be sentimental about a room. She was going to be useful, which was what she had promised herself and what the room was owed. The review took 11 days across the full Meridian facility. The report she wrote was 43 pages and it did not read like a policy document. It read like an account of what she had found when she looked carefully at what happened between the protocols and the people they were designed to protect. It contained 22 specific recommendations. 8 of them were structural, 4 of them were financial, and 10 of them were what she thought of as the other kind, the recommendations that did not appear on budget documents because they had not previously had a category, things like the way a charge nurse was deployed, the way call light response was timed and staffed, the way a newly admitted palliative patient was introduced to their primary nurse. The morning of the TOAST protocol was the name she used internally, never officially, for Recommendation 17, which addressed the specific mechanism by which dietary orders for palliative patients were evaluated and adjusted. She had written it carefully and precisely, and she had made sure it named the gap it was closing without naming the morning that had shown her where the gap was. Some things were better carried in the work than in the documentation. The full Hargrove operational review covered all 23 former Halcyon facilities over 7 months. Grace spent those 7 months on floors. Not in offices, not in Charlotte boardrooms, not in the kind of meetings that produced slides with the word optimization in them. She spent them the way she had always spent her professional time, at the level of the work, in the rooms where the work actually happened, talking to the people who were doing it. She found 41 nurses across the network whose situation looked, from varying angles, like versions of her own. People doing the work correctly, which meant doing it in a way that the protocols could not fully contain, which meant accumulating documentation that the system read as deviation rather than excellence. She flagged every one of them. She wrote specific accounts of what she had observed. She built, from those 41 accounts, the structural argument for what the network's care model needed to become. James Hargrove read every page of every report. She knew this not because he told her, but because his questions during their weekly calls were always specific to the pages that mattered most, the ones where she had been most direct about what was wrong and most precise about what it would cost to fix it. He did not push back on the cost analyses. He pushed back occasionally on her conclusions, which she had expected and which she respected, because a conclusion that couldn't survive a serious challenge wasn't one she wanted the system to rely on. They had an argument in March about staffing ratios and overtime costs that lasted 40 minutes and ended with her being right and him acknowledging it and neither of them making a large thing of either fact. That was when she understood they were going to work together for a long time. She moved to Charlotte in April. A 2-bedroom apartment near the river that she furnished more deliberately than she had furnished the one on Marsh Street, because this one felt permanent in a way she was ready to accept. She hung more than 12 things on the walls. She bought a couch she actually liked. She unpacked the sewing machine and found that she still didn't use it, which was fine. Some things were for who you intended to be rather than who you were, and there was no harm in keeping them. She called her mother every Sunday. She called Darlene occasionally. Darlene had been promoted to Director of Nursing Operations for Meridian under the new ownership structure, which was right and which Grace had recommended, and which Darlene had accepted with the characteristic brevity of someone who felt strongly about a thing but did not see the value in making a speech about it. She thought about Walter sometimes. Not with grief exactly, though grief was part of it. With the specific quality of thought that you gave people who had told you something you were still working out the full meaning of. She thought about what he had said to James. The kind of person who knows what things are actually for. She turned that over sometimes when she was writing a report or sitting in a room that needed her full attention. She used it the way you used something a person left you when they went. Not as a memorial but as a tool. In June, 11 months after a Tuesday in October, the first cohort of what the Hargrove Network called the Clinical Integrity Fellows completed their training. 30 nurses from 15 facilities, selected through the evaluation process Grace had built. People who had been flagged for doing the work correctly in ways the system had not previously had room for. They came to Charlotte for 5 days and Grace spent those 5 days with them in the same way she had spent time with patients for 6 years. Fully present, asking specific questions and actually wanting the specific answers. On the last afternoon, one of them, a nurse from a Hargrove facility in Baton Rouge named Marcus, stayed after the others had gone. He was 31 years old and had the particular quality of someone who had been paying attention for a long time and was still deciding what to do with all of it. He said, "Can I ask how this started? This program?" She looked at him. She said, "A dying patient asked me for toast." He looked at her for a moment, deciding whether this was a parable or a literal account. She said, "It's literal. He asked for toast. His wife used to make it. I made it. I got fired." A man who had been in the room across the hall sent a car. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And you got in?" She said, "I got in." He nodded slowly. He had the look of someone filing something away in a place where they kept things they intended to use. She said, "The thing about the toast is that it wasn't about the toast. He needed someone to sit in the chair. 11 days no one sat in that chair. I made toast and I sat in the chair and I held his hand and I told him he did right, and what I was actually doing was telling him his life had been seen. That's all any of it is. Every protocol deviation I've ever been documented for, every 11-minute evening, every covered tray. All of it was the same thing, sitting in the chair when no one else did." She looked at Marcus. She said, "That's what this program is for. That's what all 30 of you are for. You are the people who sit in the chair. And for the first time, the structure knows you exist." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Thank you." She said, "Go back and do the work." He did. She stood at the window of the training room after he left and looked out at Charlotte in the June evening. The city going amber in the late light, the river visible from here if you looked for it. She thought about Callaway. About Marsh Street and the apartment and the photograph of her grandmother laughing at something outside the frame. She had brought the photograph to Charlotte. It was on the wall in her new apartment. Her grandmother, laughing, completely open to whatever was just beyond the edge of the picture. She thought about James Hargrove sitting in room 412 with a shared wall and 2 days of observation and a note folded on a leather seat. She thought about the specific chain of choices that had produced this room and this evening and 30 nurses going home to 30 hospitals with a structure behind them that had not existed a year ago. Each choice hers. Each one, she knew without question, one she would make again. She picked up her phone and called him. He answered on the second ring. She said, "The first cohort finished today." He said, "I know. Claire sent me Marcus's evaluation." A pause. "It was exceptional." She said, "They all were." He said, "Yes." And then, "How are you?" She looked out the window at the June evening and the river in the amber light and the city that was becoming hers the same way cities always became hers. One street and one morning and one specific reason to stay at a time. She said, "I'm good." And then, because it was true and because it was the kind of thing that should be said out loud to the person who was part of it, she said, "This is what it was supposed to be for." He said, "Yes, I think it is." She stood at the window for a long moment after the call ended, watching the light change over the city, and she thought about the particular nature of the way things connected across time. How a choice made in a moment of absolute clarity, a toast and a chair and a hand over a hand, could travel forward through weeks and months and become something that held 43,000 people more firmly inside the work they were already trying to do. She had not made the toast for a reward. She had not sat in the chair because she expected anything to come of it. She had done it because a man needed it done and she was the one standing there, and the reason had been sufficient then and it was sufficient now. It had always been sufficient. That was the part she wanted every one of those 30 nurses to carry back with them. That the sufficient reason was enough. That you did not need to see the chain of consequences before you acted. That sometimes you just needed to close the door and pull the chair up and sit down and hold a hand. The rest took care of itself. The rest, she had learned, had a way of doing exactly that. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.